Ohayo gozaimasu. Welcome to Naruse Mikio commentary. I reviewed the other day A Wife's Heart, and in doing so, in rewatching the film, I found a couple of really interesting scenes that, rather than try and incorporate into my review as specific analyses, I thought I would offer here, largely because this is a film that I think is a little bit more difficult to see, so you would get to have specific scenes to watch in their entirety, and that also would allow me to adumbrate specific features of in a little bit more detail without, as I said, trying to cram into the review and bogging it down. There are some scenes in this film that have really interesting stylistic and or narrative features that I think would really benefit from having a kind of detailed commentary. So I'm going to present the scenes here, and I'm going to offer a commentary on the scenes. One in particular I'm going to run a couple of times, only because I think once I can describe what's going on in the scene from a stylistic point of view, I'll be able to better analyze those features. So I'm going to let it run through and describe what's happening stylistically, narratively, and then I'm going to offer more detailed comments. So we'll get perhaps 2 or 3 runs of one scene, and then maybe 1 or 2 of another, in order for me to talk over and properly explore and expand upon the key points, rather than sort of rushing or curtailing myself. So I hope this is of some use. Do let me know what you think of it. Let me know, as always, any points you'd like to raise, whether you agree or disagree, any other scenes or films or filmmakers you'd like me to address. I'm always happy, more than happy to take suggestions, as it were. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this is of use. Follow me on X, AdamBingham01. Check out my website at culturaljapan.com and enjoy. Okay, so this is the very beginning of A Wife's Heart, and we open with a panoramic high-angle establishing shot of the kind that Naruse would not use that much in his career. This second shot here is one he would normally open on, or even this third shot outside the family at the heart of the narrative's home and shop. But I think this panoramic establishing shot is there to establish the whole of the sort of suburban space in which this narrative takes place, and is there as a contrast to the sort of claustrophobic sense that a lot of characters will be living in the same house and will be getting in each other's way. We also get a good sense here of Naruse's treatment of actors, and in particular stars. Takamine Hideko, perhaps his most recognizable and frequent collaborator and biggest star in some ways, is introduced in a very unstar-like way, creating a very marked tension between star and role. Something that he will also do with Mifune Toshiro when he is introduced shortly. As well as introducing the other characters, such as Takamine's young sister-in-law and here her mother-in-law, we also get a sense of how the narrative will develop with stories overlapping, with characters sort of running into each other, stories clashing and colliding, a proliferation of, as it were, micro narratives. And this is something that we will see throughout. Here we're being introduced to what will be perhaps the overriding story, that is of the building of a cafe adjacent to the family home. And here we get something else that's very rare in Naruse, something that looks very much like an optical point of view shot as Takamine's husband looks at construction going on. And this reminds us that we are in the mid-1950s, 1956, to be precise, when a government white paper was published in Japan declaring that the post-war is over. So this sense of construction, which we see going on around the characters, alludes to the fact of the development of Japan, the building literally of a new Japan, one that would be unrecognizable in only a few years' time when the economic miracle took hold. A little bit of exposition here as Takamine pays her respects at a shrine, and we learn a little bit about her deceased mother and father. Her reaction to being told about that is interesting. She looks forlorn, and we get the sense, not necessarily with the fact that they're dead, but just being kind of reminded about what she's doing. It feels almost like she's going through the motions of visiting this shrine. This is something that will be forever sort of bubbling under the surface of this film. It's something that's never addressed, but she talks later on about a nostalgia for the war years. Perhaps that is something that reminds us of when her family was around, and perhaps also of the fact that she is not entirely comfortable with this new Japan, albeit she's trying with the construction of the cafe to make her way in this new face of her country. Now we pick up a little later in the narrative with Takamine honing her skills in the kitchen so that she can work in the cafe that she and her husband are in the process of financing. To wit, we're going to soon be introduced for the first time in the narrative, and again in a very unassuming way, to Mifune Toshiro's character. This is the second of two films that Mifune made with Naruse, and something of a departure for an actor whose persona was just being shaped by the likes of Rashomon and Seven Samurai. We have the entrance into the narrative here of two young geisha, who will be increasingly central as the film goes on. And we have an outsider perspective on this developing relationship. So the relationship between Takamine and Mifune. So again, we are being taken out of what seems to be the key narrative material and offered a distanced point of view. We are seeing their relationship through other eyes, and we again get a point of view shot of a desirous female character. This is something that very much offsets the at this point at least platonic relationship between Mifune and Takamine that will never develop beyond the platonic, but which is riven with undertones of mutual attraction and of a growing intimacy. Here we have the sense again of abrupt sort of in medias res narration. We have another abrupt entry into the narrative and another sense of presence and absence. Here is the sister-in-law of Takamine's husband, who has just arrived. We have no real build up to her arriving. It's a sudden, intrusive arrival, and I guess perhaps to match that, she arrives very unceremoniously into the narrative with a very abrupt cut from the cafe. And here we have the husband leaving and running into his wife. Again, that sense of being in the house and being outside the house, and the tension, the sense of one going out while the other's in, and vice versa, and sort of meeting in passing. And this fuels the sense that their marriage really is on the wane. Okay, so we begin with this long shot of Takamine and Mifune out walking together in what we think will be a prelude to a scene between them, before cutting back to Takamine's husband. This is very much an intrinsic sort of editorial norm in this film, to introduce a scene and then cut away from it. Here we go back to the troubles at the family home, from which Takamine is, in a sense, taking flight, back to the issues with her husband and her brother-in-law and his wife, announcing that they will be moving to Tokyo for business reasons, but will be leaving behind their daughter, in essence, to be the daughter or stepdaughter of Takamine and her husband. This is something that will be sort of thematically adumbrated soon. We cut to this exterior where a member of the public, not a character in the film, talks about a rainstorm starting, and then we cut a direct cut, a straight cut, to clearly time having elapsed, where Takamine and Mifune are waiting out this rainstorm that seems in full swing. They've obviously taken refuge in a small cafe in order to wait out the storm, and this leads to a kind of nostalgic reverie on the part of Takamine's character. She notes that she's nostalgic for wartime days, which probably bespeaks a lot about her current unhappiness. And here we cut to this long shot of children running through the rain, a small child picking up something to cover his head with, which leads Mifune's character to extol his love for children, something that prompts a kind of forlorn, melancholic look. This feeds into, I think, an explication of Takamine's character's sense of perhaps disenfranchisement, that she never wanted kids. Her face lights up when she asks Mifune's character if he does want kids, and she clearly takes some delight in his reaction. There's clearly a projection onto him of what may lie in store, or perhaps may have lain in store for her had she got together with him, or if she goes on to do that. And quickly the forlorn, melancholic look is replaced. We then get this pillow shot, and I'll say more about that shortly, before cutting back to the conversation. Despite the brief flash of sunshine, the melancholy has returned, and another pillow shot. So once again, we get these overlapping, intertwined narratives here. The beginning of the scene with Takamine and Mifune, that is delayed, if you like, in its continuation as we return to her husband, which again furthers this tension about being in the home and being outside of it, something that is a very key sort of antinomy throughout the film, and something that both husband and wife will have recriminations, or have had recriminations with each other over. That sense of being present and being absent is also something that is teased out here as a correlative with the wife of the husband's brother. He has gone back to Tokyo, so he's absent, and his wife is going to follow him, but they're going to leave their small child behind, their daughter. Here we get the interesting treatment of time that I've already remarked on, the straight cut from the establishment of the fact that it's starting to rain, which is narratively sort of not really necessary. And this shot here of a scene that is already, as it were, in medias res, already underway. Naruse treats time in a very interesting way here, compressing it without alluding to its passage. So we are, in a sense, having to read the precise sort of temporal placement of this scene as we go along. So we're kind of one step behind, if you like. So we are, in a sense, being placed through this narration outside of the immediate sort of consciousness of the characters, and this includes the protagonist. This is something that is key to this film throughout, the fact that we are not entirely anchored in her consciousness, or we are not entirely seeing the world through her point of view. We also get the aforementioned sense of nostalgia here, that sense of looking back, that is interestingly placed in a scene where the two characters are talking about childhood. That sense of a very marked tension between past, present, and the future that we could see the children as representing. They also, of course, represent the sense of family, that a complete family, at least from the perception of most Japanese, that these characters don't have, and we infer perhaps never will. I mentioned previously, commented on the scene about the pillow shots here. Now, anyone who knows Ozu Yasujiro's work knows what I mean by pillow shots, these interstitial cutaways to spatially contiguous locations, that is, locations just outside of the environment in which the scene is taking place. These aren't the only ones in Naruse's career, but he doesn't use them in this marked Ozu-like way as cutaways as he does here, which is interesting, the fact that he would have this most Ozu-like moment at this particular point in the narrative. And I've talked elsewhere about how he uses intertextual references to Ozu, so check out my other reviews for continuation of this. And then we get, as I noted, dissolves, which are, again, not often used, certainly in this obvious way to mark the passage of time. So I think this is something else that is worth bearing in mind with regard to how we read the development of this narrative. I think ultimately what we get here is a kind of concatenation of techniques used in essence against themselves. That is, at the beginning or towards the beginning of this scene, we get a straight cut where clearly time has elapsed, and at the end we get a dissolve where at least potentially or arguably no time, certainly no significant time, has elapsed, when there is a dissolve to the long shot of Mifune and Takamine in the cafe, before the dissolve to Mifune to Takamine, I'm sorry, sitting before the mirror. So at a time when we have a looking back, a nostalgia for the war days, at a time when we have children signifying some sort of potential, even if we don't feel it will be realized in the future, we get this confusion of time, this ambiguity over time. So quite subtly, Naruse is making time itself a prominent theme as it relates to this character's sense of herself. And I think the culmination in the dissolve to Takamine sitting before the mirror, not quite looking at herself, not quite engaging with herself, not quite looking back or looking forward with any joy or with any clarity, is really telling and important here.